Well, good morning. Dick Millick here with the Veterans History Project. Today's date is the 27th of August 2021. And I'm sitting in front of, or sitting behind, Eugene McCarthy here, who's going to tell his story about what he did in the military and what he did after the military. So Gene, I'm just going to kind of start you off with asking you, where you were born, when you were born, what was the date, kind of a little early family background.
Okay. I was born in San Francisco, St. Joseph's Hospital. And my mother and father, obviously, were a young couple. Their first baby, me. About a year and a half after I was born, 2 years, another baby, my mother became pregnant. The sad part is that she died in childbirth.
Oh,
the child died in utero, meaning the fetus, was dead within her body and set up a poisoning in her system, and she died as a result. My father, Thomas Francis McCarthy, good Irishman.
Yes.
He and his family had been in San Francisco since the early 1800s. He just couldn't take care of me. So he asked his father, Thomas Bernard McCarthy, and his wife, Bertha, to assume care.
That was in San Francisco.
That was 1942.
Wow.
So I was born in 1940. They moved to Southern California during the war. So a lot was going on. My father at the time was a bartender, actor, that sort of thing, in the Cavalcade of Nations at a huge event in San Francisco on Treasure Island. It was built specifically for this event. I still have pictures of him. But I moved with my grandparents back to Southern California, Yermo, California, which was just outside of an army base, where my grandfather worked as a carpenter.
Now, again, you were born, what date again?
June 4th, 1940.
40, okay.
And we lived there for a while and so on, and finally moved to a location in Alhambra, California. I still remember the address. 2411 Orange Street. Anyway, my grandfather continued working as a carpenter. His wife, interestingly, his wife Bertha McCarthy was my real mother, my mother's great aunt. So that made her my step grandmother and my great great aunt. So
interesting.
Yes, family
yes.
And so on. So I grew up for a period of time through the war. When the war ended, we were still living in Alhambra, California. And then years later moved to San Gabriel, which is a community just southeast of Alhambra. And geographically, Alhambra is just south of Pasadena, where the Rose Parade occurs.
Did you see your father during this time frame, or was that kind of a...
I didn't see my father until about 1949. I was 9 years old. He came to visit his father. I had not received a card, nothing, a letter, nothing. He came to visit his father. He brought his new wife with him, Velma. And it was a tumultuous period of time, conflict between father and son and so on and so forth. As I recall, they were both alcoholics, both of them.
But isn't that a traditional Irish...
Oh, well, you'd think so, not everyone, but...
But I mean,
yeah.
Alcohol, drinking, my dad was pouring me a little shot of beer
Right.
at 6 years old. He was teaching me to drink,
Right. I have done genealogical research approaching 30 years worth. I'm very familiar with both sides of my family, my mother and my father. My father's side of the family, every man and woman died of some form of alcoholism, cirrhosis of the liver. My father died as a homeless person on the streets of San Francisco in 1967. But I had only seen him twice. My childhood had a lot of issues, emotional issues, and so on and so forth. Not sure where I was going to be living. They had talked about sending me to my father's brother to live down in San Diego. That didn't happen. My grandfather, being an alcoholic, essentially died of it. What I'm saying for this is, and I've written it down in my own biography, my grandfather and his son, my father, was fighting in the streets on a rainy day, fighting over a woman, the new wife. So what went on there, I have the slightest idea. I was just a kid,
Right.
and so on. And my grandfather died in 1951. It makes me 11 years of age. The property where we lived in San Gabriel was sold, and his wife, Bertha McCarthy, my great aunt and step-grandmother, she continued to raise me. A wonderful woman, incredible woman. Imagine at that age, after the grief and everything, raising a young kid into his teenage years.
Wow.
Yeah, but she stuck it out.
There's always special place in heaven for certain people. You know?
Without a doubt, just an incredible woman. I remember many things, but I was a teenager. I was a typical teenager. Did I acknowledge her value? No, I didn't. As I grew through my middle school years into high school and so on and so forth, I wasn't really, I didn't have a lot of sense of belonging. I was not involved in sports. I was not involved in any school clubs. The one thing I was involved with was outside of the high school, and that was church. And my grandmother was not a religious person at all. I just happened to know some friends and who introduced me to a church in Alhambra, California, where I joined the choir. I was on the basketball team for the church.
So
Beach outings.
You found your home
I
there?
found a home, and I found people who thought like I did. Well, so I was, I guess you would call, I was a youthful Christian. I was baptized and so on in that church, but I really didn't know what that meant. And when I left to go into the service, I left all of that behind, and the secular world grabbed me until I was in my mid-70s.
So now you're going through high school.
Right.
You've found a place that sought you comfort and friends and that type of thing.
Right.
So then the big question is, what caused you to go in the military? Was your father in the military? Was there any family? There was no influence on going into the military family-wise?
Only an uncle, Victor Hess, who I saw more often than I ever saw my father. He was in the Marines. And when he left the Marines, during the Korean War, when he left the Marines, he went into the Merchant Marines. Unfortunately, he passed away off the coast of Vietnam, not during Vietnam conflict, but off the coast of Vietnam. That was the only person that was on my mother's side of the family that was in the military. Except for, if I go all the way back on my mother's side to the Revolutionary War, but we'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, right.
It was the recession was going on, the Eisenhower recession. And I was working part-time, I was still attending high school, in a machine shop. And I was learning to operate a lathe and empty the trash and do everything, the scut work. and recession came along and affected that business, what have you, and so they had to lay me off. Well, I was going to be graduating in a couple of months, and I'm getting laid off, and my child welfare that we received was going to be cut off too because I was 18. So there was zero money.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandmother, she got old age assistance, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember, but we lived at probably less than $150 a month.
Wow.
But I never recall being poor, ever.
Well, you know, that's the beauty of youth and the reality of what's going on in your life at the time. That's the way it is.
Absolutely. So I pondered, what am I going to do? There wasn't a lot of work available at the time. So I went down to the recruiting office in Alhambra, California. And the first door I walked into was the Air Force. You know, I was met by the recruiter and got all signed up and so on, and found out that I'd have to wait several months before I went off to basic. Well, I couldn't wait several months. So I met a friend who was a high school friend who was considering joining the Army. So we went down and signed up on a buddy plan to join the Army. And that was in July of 1958.
The buddy plan, that was an actual, you and your buddy theoretically are going to the same basic and all that kind of stuff.
All that stuff. Yeah. Didn't mean you were going to stay together all the time.
No, I realize it, but that's the big question. Right. Did you or didn't you start? So, yeah. But everybody's in basic, so you're doing the basic together.
So we got ready to go and said our goodbyes to my, I called her Mom. I'm going to call her Mom for the rest of this. I said goodbye to Mom and the high school chums and that sort of thing, and Dick Kaufman was my buddy. His mother drove us down to the Union Station in Los Angeles, where we boarded a train for Fort Ord, California. My first time on a train, I believe. I think maybe some years ago, but yeah, I was on my own, and we were met by a NCO at the train, where we boarded buses and went to Fort Ord. And when we got off, I started my career in the military with a shouting, screaming drill sergeant.
The old famous, my name's Sergeant Brown.
Yeah.
You can call me by my first name, Sergeant, type thing.
Yeah. Well, I'll get back to that sergeant.
Okay.
Because I have a story there. So, of course, they marched us right over to get our hair cut and so on and so forth. How would you like it? and of course, all the hair is cut off, and then march over to get a uniform that didn't fit, and some brown boots, and Class A uniforms. In that case, it was an Eisenhower jacket OD.
Oh, really?
And duffel bag and all the underwear and everything else and so on. And then we were assigned to our basic training billets. 2-story World War II style billets, wooden. We went through testing and so on. I guess it was to see what kind of aptitude we had for future training and so on. But one thing I do remember, I remember that drill sergeant. His name was Sergeant Marner.
Marner.
Sergeant Marner was about a 5'7" black man with no neck. And he had his drill sergeant hat and what have you. And I remember we were all lined up, and he came over to me and he put that brim of that hat right against my forehead and screamed at me. And I'm standing at attention. I just learned how to stand at attention. And he said, "Did you write home to your mother?" And I said, "No, Sergeant." And he says, well, you better write home to your mother and tell him to sell your ass because you just, and then went on and so on. So that was one of my, I still
Indoctrination.
Indoctrination. Anyway, I did enjoy the camaraderie and teamwork and that sort of thing. And that really, I can play that off into my future life. But I learned to get along with people unlike me, and to interact with and complain to and so on and so forth, all the way through basic. Well, sometime in the middle of basic, although I had originally signed up for the military police, that's where I was supposed to go for training after
basic?
after AIT and
Okay.
then so on, advanced infantry training.
Right.
But this guy showed up there at Fort Ord in basic, and he was sharp. He had blouse spit shine boots that you could see your face in. He had a patch on his sleeve, just like that one up there, 101st Airborne Division. And he says, you want to be paratroopers? And he gave us every reason in the world to jump out of perfectly good airplanes. And so we were just thrilled to think that we could be paratroopers. Because where had we seen this? In the movies.
All right.
In the movies. John Wayne, maybe. So after advanced infantry training, still at Fort Ord, we were sent off to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. But before that, I had gotten home and spent time with my mom, and proudly wearing my uniform back to high school with all those young ladies, what have you, and so on. It was a good feeling to belong.
So you finished advanced infantry training,
Yeah.
and then I assume this gentleman who was the epitome of a poster boy type
Yes.
person
Yeah.
has talked you into going to jump school.
Yes.
So now you had your little vacation. Now it's off to jump school?
Off to jump school, and I remember that distinctly. We boarded an airplane. Well, I think I'd been on an airplane one time as a young kid down, I believe it was down in San Diego someplace. It was a little light wing plane and so on. I think my uncle took me up. No, he wasn't flying, but he took me up for a ride. But that was it. So we got in an airplane. We landed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And I remember it was cold. It was near midnight. And it was cold. I hadn't experienced that kind. I'm a Southern California beach kid. And the smell of coal burning. Well, it was a bus. We took us from where we landed in the airplane over to where we were going to go to Reppel-Deppel replacement and so on. And the sergeants, again, screaming at us to get off the bus, grab your
Now
bags.
this isn't the same guy though.
No,
No.
different. Yeah, I mean, just screaming at us. Yes, I remember. His name was Sergeant Tilley.
Tilly.
Sergeant Tilley. Well, Sergeant Tilley got us offloaded and took us over to what they call the Reppel-Deppel, and to typical World War II wooden barrack, two-story, with the bunk beds double-tiered on both sides and so on. And in the middle of the floor, on the wooden floor, was painted the 101st Airborne Screaming Eagle. And he warned us, if you step on that eagle, you're going to paint it. There must have been several coats of paint on that eagle. So after we were assigned, I got our assignments, TUNE assignments. I was assigned to Headquarters Company 502nd Infantry, and newer buildings, two-story buildings, and I was again assigned to S4, which is supply and transportation. My sergeant was Sergeant Dunlap. He was the two-striper. He was the, I forget, anyway, he was a sergeant, and his assistant, a staff sergeant, was Sergeant Tinchner. Nice guy. But we learned to fall out at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning in the cold, line up while they roll call and so forth, and then file over to the mess hall. Well, the mess hall was an interesting place. The cook, his name was Clackley. How do I remember all this?
It's always amazing. I mean, you probably haven't used that term in the last 50 years.
Sergeant Clackley was a giant black man, what have you, that when he was behind, he was sweating, constantly sweating, and he had the white cook's clothes and so on and so forth. But he made great chow, great chow. Of course, the typical SOS.
Yeah.
Can I say that on?
You sure?
SOS, shit on a shingle.
That's right.
Well, I've learned what shit on a shingle. Actually, I learned to like it.
And isn't that amazing? I don't know if you're just hungry. Could it be just hungry?
I don't know. But you know, we during the day we worked hard. They worked us all throughout the day. And if we weren't working, we were up there polishing the floors. And I remember the bay where we lived. We're on the second floor. And we, every once in a while, we would strip the entire floor, move all the beds to one side, and strip the floors, these tile floors. And there must have been hundreds of coats of wax on it. And we would use a red wax that we put down by hand, on our hands and knees, and put it on there, and then buff it with a blanket so it was like a mirror. Mm-hmm. And then move it all back and do the other side. There were several guys on the platoon that were selected as platoon leaders. They got their own room, but they kept their room just as immaculate as we did, or we were forced to. I kind of liked the idea of having a foot locker with everything lined up and so on and so forth.
You knew where everything was, and
and my socks were all rolled and laid out in it, and my uniforms in my locker were in there with all the sleeves turned just like this, so that. And then on top of the foot locker was our pack and our helmet and so on and so forth that we kept up there. And periodic inspections. We'd have 2 pairs of boots. The original pair I mentioned was brown. When we were issued, we dyed them black. The uniform changed.
I see. That's what I was thinking.
We had a uniform change. So, but then we had a second pair of boots, and I remember the name. They were Cochrane's. Cochrane jump boots. And Cochrane's, I had a pair that I would proudly polish almost nightly. There were no holes left in the cap. It was filled with perfect wax.
Right.
And the sides were gleaming mirrors. It got so good when I really got broke, I could take it outside to a pawn shop and pawn them for $10. And then buy them back and so on and so forth. It was a interesting group of people.
Did they I didn't go through a basic type thing. I went through ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps.
Right.
And we were issued poots and stuff, and they said, here's the easiest way to break it in. Stand in the tub, get them wet, and wear them all day. And your foot, it's like, your foot now is permeated into that leather and stuff. But it was a brutal day trying to.
I would imagine walking around and you get trench foot or something like that. Let's see. Okay,
so when you're, I assume there's some basic bookwork type things that you're thinking about, but there comes a time when it's time to kind of hook up and see what it's like to. What's that training all about?
Well, the stand up, hook up, shuffle to the door. Certainly after we were assigned, we were also assigned to attend jump school. The picture up there on the wall shows a helmet, me wearing a helmet, and a parachute, reserve. My helmet says 312. And that was my assignment. I become not Gene McCarthy, not private, not PFC, 312, sir! So we went to jump school there at Fort Campbell. It was unlike Fort Benning, where they had the 200-foot towers and so on and so forth. We had what's called 34-foot towers, and I'll mention that in a minute. It was 3 weeks for the jump school. Sounds like a short period of time, but it felt like an eternity. It was constant movement. DIs, jump masters, instructing us what to do. Largely it's all for safety. How to exit an aircraft, how to get out of the aircraft, and so on. When we got on the ground, what to do, and so on and so forth. So again, it was extremely cold. We would run every day. We ran everywhere we went.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Were you in pretty good shape by the time that jump school was?
Oh, there was no doubt about that. I was not a big muscle guy, but I was in good shape. I was.
Did you notice the difference in your physical capabilities, or did it feel like you were?
I don't remember that. I don't recall that. I knew I didn't, like today. I get up and I ache everywhere. I wasn't like that. I had moved all day long, doing whatever they asked me to do, and learning how to exit and jump on the ground, do a PLF, parachute landing fall, properly to save injuries, and then run. But one time, it was just before we were about to go to our first jump.
You mean a physical jump out of a plane?
Out of an aircraft.
This is all stationary focus at this time.
Right. And we were running, it was a 5-mile run. And you do it in full boots and uniform and so on and so forth. And if you messed up, you had to run around the platoon as they ran. The drill sergeant, he would sometimes do so to show you how fit he was. And this day, it was so cold that they were worried that we were going to come down with pneumonia because we were sweating and so on and so forth. And so they put us in the basement where they had furnaces, coal burning furnaces, to heat us up. That's how bad it was.
Wow.
Previous to putting us down there, we were doing sit-ups in the sawdust pit you had to break the ice and to lay down to do the sit-ups and so on and so forth. And I'm not complaining. I think that was all valuable to prepare my body and my mind and so on and so forth for what could come. Of course, we went through all the classes on military. I still have books up there on that. I think it's the one I originally had on Uniform Code of Justice and on and on and on. So it was an interesting time. After we graduated from jump school,
How many jumps did it take, or to define that you completed the jumps?
One.
Was there one?
Well, actually, there was 5 jumps, but it was 5 jumps that you had to do in order to get your wings.
Okay.
Get your wings, and they were called blood wings, and they were silver. They were really silver, and you wore those on your Class A uniform. The others were sewn on patches and so on. The first jump, I was really nervous, as everyone else was. Yeah. And we flew around, and it seemed like an eternity. And it was a C-120.
Do you remember the aircraft that you were in?
C-123. C-1, there's a picture of it right there. That's it. There's the tail numbers.
Yeah.
Tail numbers on it. I know the history on that aircraft. It crashed someplace. And a friend of mine found the tail number and looked it up, the history and so on. But that day, as we flew around, it seemed like hours. They said, "Stand up," and we did, just like we hit.
Now, is there a microphone, or is there? How do you?
It's hand signals.
Hand signals. Because you could hardly.
It's really noisy inside this tunnel, if you will, and you're on both sides and so And so there's two sticks, they call it a stick, a line of men. And there's a door on both sides and so on. So we stand up, and he goes, stand up. And hook up. Check your equipment. What you were doing is you were checking the guy in front of you, and he was checking you. And this is, again, teamwork, buddy work,
Right.
taking care of each other. And so shuffle to the door, and you learn to shuffle to the door.
Is that because shuffling was?
So you didn't walk like this. You walked with one foot and then one foot, just shuffling to the door.
And that was probably. I mean, you're wearing a couple pounds of gear on all your stuff. I don't know what all that stuff weighs, but it's not.
And your static line, because this is a static line jump, though the static line is what opens your parachute, opens the backpack that releases the parachute after you exit the aircraft. But you grab your static line in a loop like this. So the loop's hanging over your arm, and this one's up to a wire that goes to the rear of the plane. And so you're shuffling to the door. When you get to the door, you stand in the door and go. There's no hesitation. Go. I would imagine some hesitated, but they kicked him out the door, pushed him out.
Well, you're kind of in a line, kind of.
You're
That movement is kind of.
you're a foot apart.
Yeah.
Maybe a foot and a half apart. So as soon as you exit that door, you learn to keep your feet together and what have you, and your hands are over the front of your reserve, and so when your chin is tucked in, and out you go. And you feel that slowness, the chute is being deployed and is slowing you down, what have you. And then all of a sudden you can reach up, and that canopy's up above you, and you just take those risers and reach as high as you can. Now it's floating down. You're floating down. It's wonderful. You get to look all over the place and so on.
Can you control
Yes.
the kind of direction? I mean,
Yes.
is there some kind of lead? I mean, everybody doesn't go right, or something. Are you trying to follow the man in front of you? Or?
No, you're not trying to. The wind will take care of that. However, you can control the canopy somewhat. They were called T10 canopies. The canopies before that were called T7s, and they had a terrible opening shock. Bam! It just jar you terribly. The T10s were a little bit slower in their opening and so on. But unlike today's paratroopers, the people who are jumping, what have you, we didn't have toggles to steer our canopy. We had risers. We reached up to the risers that came from back and from the front of your shoulder harness, what have you, to the canopy and the shroud lines. And so we grabbed the front of it and tilt it down. It would dump the top of the canopy, spilling the air on the back, and obviously you're going to go forward.
Ah.
So you do one, and so you're going this way, and so on.
So you can't control
You can steer it to a degree.
Right.
And you want to go down and hit the drop zone. And of course they always told you there's going to be a truck down there waiting for you sometimes. Let me back up a little bit.
Sure.
Because when I first arrived at Fort Campbell, we had heard about a memorial service for several paratroopers. I think there were 10 or 11 that died at Yamota Drop Zone, actually just a couple of miles from where our billets were. And they died in a shear wind, meaning that when the aircraft flew over to deploy the troops, what have you, they dropped a tattletale to see wind direction, that sort of, and the jump master, he would watch that. Well, the shear wind, one's going this way, one's going that way. Well, they got down past that first layer, and it was a severe wind, and it drug them to death on the ground.
Mm.
Some guys had partials and so on, choked on their partials, and literally drugged them to death. Well, today in the military, they have what's called cape well releases, and you can reach up and release it, and the canopy spills off. We didn't have that. We were taught when we landed on the ground, the wind is still blowing that chute and dragging us. We could reach up to one riser and pull down all the way to our waist and spin our body around and let the chute pull us up. And we ran around it to deflate the canopy. But it was to this day, I mean, I just loved doing it. I didn't get to jump very much while I was in the service. It was a pay jump. Every 3 months you had to jump, I think. Well, anyway, we got $55 extra pay for jumping out of airplanes.
That'll take you down the street.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it's $55 a month, and it was and the pride of being in
Sure.
uniform. Oh, it was incredible. I mean, a lot of people complained about the service. I didn't.
It's interesting to see how maybe that's a function of people not being able to conform to the situation that's going on. That they just can't, they can't stomach it. But that camaraderie is a special thing.
Oh, there's no doubt.
And there's very few. You were in the also involved with the later on, and I'm sure you'll explain that in the fire department stuff. The guy to your left and the guy to your right, and you're looking after both of them, and they're looking at everybody. It's a very unique situation that you can't duplicate in a job that you take or
It's not a job.
yeah. Yeah.
The fire service is not a job. It was a calling.
Right.
Anyway, back to the military and so on. So I participated in various exercises and so on. On one occasion, it was at Fort Breckenridge, Kentucky, and it was a massive exercise they heavy dropped 3/4 ton trucks and tracked vehicles and so on, for these big, huge canopies and so on. So I drove there. I think I drove there. I don't remember. Maybe I did.
So you could observe it then?
No, I was part of a unit and so on.
But I mean, could you?
I was there, so I saw this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there was an incident that occurred at Fort Breckenridge that I have to relate because it was important. Being part of supply and transportation, I was driving a 3/4 ton truck. Now I don't remember where my truck was dropped or not, but nevertheless I was there with a 3/4 ton truck and watching this heavy equipment being dropped from the sky. And of course the exercise, we had an aggressor team and we had, so on and so forth. I was driving a 3/4 ton truck on an assignment to take some dynamite without caps, no caps. It's just the dynamite.
Just the stick type?
It's just inert. It's
Yeah.
just inert without the cap.
Right.
And I think I had 2 or 3 people in a combat stripped, windshield down, top off, 3/4 ton truck with a sergeant in the back and I think 2 other guys. And it was, again, very cold. And I'm on a highway and I'm driving on an incline, but it's over the hill, so it crashed. I couldn't see on the other side. And so I was instructed to turn around. So I saw
go back to where you came
back
from?
to where I came from. So I went up and I saw a place to turn around, but there was another truck coming over vehicle coming over the hill, and I struck head on with that truck. The sergeant in the back flew up and landed on his upper body and so on. I kind of recall that his eyes rolled back in his head. Probably a concussion. When I turned left into this turnaround spot, I'd had the windows, it was crank windows, up, keep the air away from me and so on. So they were difficult to get down, and I'm signaling like this. No one's going to see this.
Right.
So no one observed. I guess the other driver didn't observe it, what have you, or I wasn't paying attention, whatever. Well, I was placed under arrest. Military police took me and put me in a tent there at Fort Breckenridge. And it really resulted in the military wasn't, it was the civilian authorities that requested the arrest.
Because you were on...
Because I failed to signal properly, and it was an injury involved and that sort of thing. I don't remember the details.
But it wasn't on a post per se, it was on the
It was
highway
on the outside of the
right,
post.
Right.
So that's why the civilians were involved. Well, I ended up going to court and everything else, and I was represented, and I was exonerated. It was clear what have you, it was my fault, but nevertheless an injury had occurred, and for that I didn't feel good about it at all. But I was, as an 18-year-old kid, I was pretty, I was upset.
Sure.
So on and so forth. So setting that aside, I spent a couple of similar exercises. We went to what was it? It was Puerto Rico. Flew into Puerto Rico, didn't jump. And for an exercise with multiple military agencies and that sort of thing. And I even have a picture of General Westmoreland. He was part of that. And I was sitting in my vehicle. We just offloaded from the aircraft, C-123, and he was. I caught him. I don't think he was picking his nose. He was probably doing this.
Yeah.
But I caught him, and so on. So, and then I was another exercise out in the middle of Fort Campbell, and I got wind, a message that my mom had died. Well, I didn't have any money. It was towards the end of the month. I didn't have any money at all. So I got a loan from the Red Cross to buy a bus ticket, and went home. And it was kind of strange. Here she was gone. Most all my friends were either in college or in the military or somewhere, or weren't around. A few people from church, perhaps. I don't remember grieving. I actually went to a party.
Do you think you're kind of numb at that time, or
I think
just
so.
kind of shut down a little bit or something?
Because when I got out of the Army in 1961, in July of 61, I went home and the grieving began.
Interesting. Interesting.
So
they give you, what do they call it, bereavement, a week off or something?
yeah, bereavement, leave and that sort of thing. So I went back to Campbell, and I saw an opportunity, because here was I was maybe 19 then. I went back to Campbell, and there was an opportunity to go to Europe. So I applied, and I left 101st Airborne Division, and I remember we left wherever we started off, Fort Dix, New Jersey. And I had brought all my stuff in my duffel bag. I had high school albums and all that stuff. Well, they wouldn't let me take it, so I threw high school albums in the trash. Stick it in there, son. So off we went. We landed in Germany. And I was assigned to the 24th Infantry Division in Gablingen, Germany, just outside of Augsburg. 24th Infantry Division, where I had, it was kind of interesting how it happened. We got there, once again it was cold. I just remember this cold stuff. And the first place we went to was the enlisted man's bar. I remember that. I got pictures of all these Frauleins and so on, where we're all half crocked and so on. And so I hadn't gotten my assignment yet. But again, like at Fort Campbell, I was assigned to headquarters again to drive a vehicle. And I drove a 3/4-ton truck. But soon after, I guess because I had a haircut and I looked pretty good, I was selected as the Colonel's driver, Colonel Richard Verheuel.
What a name that is.
I drove his Jeep, and his Jeep was really beautiful. It was not OD, it was OD gloss. Had a big map case on the hood with an eagle, appropriately. An eagle painted
was
on
he
it.
was he 100? No.
No, which just happened to be an eagle.
Yeah.
I don't know who painted it on it. So I maintained his vehicle and drove him and that sort of thing. Well, I got in trouble. On another exercise that we were attending, maybe. I don't remember where I wasn't paying attention or what it was, but his trailer that I towed, his trailer had a bed and where a place he could put his clothes and all that sort of thing, towed by his trailer, was attacked by an aggressor force.
Does a Jeep tow it?
Jeep towed it. It was not a big trailer. It was big enough to stand up and sleep, have a little bed on the side and that sort of thing. And an aggressor force called Sneaky Pete's, kind of like Special Forces, raided us and stole it. It was like stealing someone's mascot.
Ah.
So I got busted. I went from a PFC to a private, and and there was another issue to it. I guess I had misplaced an SOI.
SOI stood for?
SOI, I don't remember, but it had to do with all the radio codes and everything else. And we were right on the brink of the Cold War situation, you know, where spies were constantly.
Sure.
So I think that was part of the reason I got an Article 15 and ended up mopping floors at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and lost a strike. Well, I wasn't real proud of that. It was obviously my record.
Sure.
And however, I was reassigned to a captain and drove him.
Ah.
So I was demoted from a colonel, from a bird colonel to a captain.
Well, did he look after you a little better then, or what?
No. No, he was kind of a strange duck. He was a strange duck. I don't want to say anything different more about him.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I won't even give you his name.
Okay.
I didn't do well with him at all. So I transferred out of headquarters to a infantry platoon. And the good Lord was looking after me. And he had all along.
When you transfer out, do you request that transfer?
I requested a transfer. And I was given a transfer. It was on the same base.
Yeah, right.
Gabligan, but just up the road. But this platoon had won an award for being the best in readiness and so on and so forth. They won an award. So I just came in and went off to enjoy the reward,
right,
which was a trip to Garmisch-Partenkirchen in Germany, which was a military resort.
Oh, wow.
And so my new assignment at the platoon was, because people found out I was an artist and somewhat of a calligrapher, that I would create their maps. And I did. I did the lettering and all that stuff. I learned how to use what's called a Leroy set, did all the lettering for these maps and so on and so forth.
Cool.
So that was kind of my last job. Gabligan was an interesting place. It was a former Nazi air base, Luftwaffe. And the old hangars were still there. And the subterranean storage areas for their aircraft were there, but flooded and destroyed. My room, which was above the arch, the entryway to Gabligan Kaserne, was the remnants of the swastika chipped off. You could still see the swastika and so on. Much of Germany at that time, 1960, was, the little towns were still, you could see the remnants of the war. Buildings were blown up halfway and so on. In Munich, you could still see a lot of buildings with bullet holes and damage and that sort of thing.
How at that time, you ever get the feeling how those small little villages made it? You know, kept what? You know, what do you can't go down to the grocery store. You know, they walk, they ride a horse. I mean, it just.
I don't know. I really don't know. It is as a 19-year-old, maybe 20 at the time. I really didn't have a sense of history. In high school, we had civics. We learned about American history, California history, and that sort of thing. But we really didn't learn about the terrible war, World War II and Korea, which was just before I went to high school. They should have taught people this stuff, but they didn't, that I recall. But as these villages, we would drive through them. One was called Hohenfels. Hohenfels was used as a training facility, realistic training facility for combat, so on. So, there was I learned a lot, but I wasn't aware of what I had learned. I observed a lot and observed history, but I was unaware of it at the time.
Mm-hmm.
A return trip there years and years later all brought it back. Now it's more important for me. Many of the people that I served with when I got out in 1961 ended up re-enlisting and ended up in Vietnam. Many of them. I don't know who they were, but many of them.
Did you contemplate at all of re-upping?
No.
No.
I was an RA 3-year guy, and I signed up for 3 years. I wanted to go home, and I wanted
the cold was enough.
Yeah.
Wherever you went, to seem the cold followed.
It was cold, but in retrospect, I learned so much. I met people there in Germany. Our tailor was a former Nazi.
You're kidding.
No, he was a tailor. He took care of all our repairs, our uniforms and everything. It was right around the corner on the second floor of where we lived. And then in town, I had a German girlfriend for a brief period of time. My buddy and I, Dave Benaziak, I have a picture of him up there. Way up, anyway. Dave and I, he had a car. He bought from some lieutenant that rotated back home. And he bought a Chevy, 56 Chevy.
Ooh, that's a good...
We rocked.
You were...
We rocked. We drove all over Europe in that Chevy. So one time we drove down to Garmisch-Partenkirchen, and we found a taxi driver, and we drove down there parked, and we had purchased at the PX cartons of cigarettes. And they were so cheap, it was unbelievable. And we traded it for a tour. And he drove us all over this taxi and showed us for a carton of cigarettes.
Wow.
But
barter still works.
Barter still works. But my girlfriend there in a little town called Donauwörth on the Donau River, important river historically. Augsburg, maybe just a few miles to the west, maybe it was famous because it was the Romans were there, and it was classic. You could still see Roman ruins and so on, especially around the rivers.
Wow.
Well, Tia, T-H-E-A, Tia was my girlfriend, and she and her mother and her cousin all lived together in a delightful little house just off a channel of the Donau River. And one day, the mother, they called her Mutti.
Mookie?
Mutti, M-U-T-I. That's short for mother.
Oh, I see.
Mom. And so what would you like for dinner when you come back next week? Because we every time we get a Class A pass, we'd go there. And I said, I would like to have a meatloaf. Well, my broken German and terrible English, I tried to describe what a meatloaf was. Well, she said, okay. The next week we came back, I'd forgotten all about that conversation. And so we were sitting around the table. We always had a beer and so on, German beer, and you know,
God, that German beer is
just
good.
Wonderful food and so on. And she had this plate with a top on it, a lid on top of the plate. and she lifted it off, and here was supposedly the meatloaf, but it was tartare, which is not cooked. It's raw meat.
Don't they?
It's seasoned.
All right,
It's seasoned and so on and so forth, but it's raw. And so I before she lifted off the lid, I asked her, "Was ist für Essen?" But I slurred Essen to eat. Was ist to eat? So, and that's not really, that doesn't line up. So, but nevertheless, it came out, "Was ist fressen?" Well, fressen is animal food.
Oof.
What is animal food? Well, I explained it away. I have to admit what I did, and rotating back to the States was not a very good thing for someone to do. I didn't tell my girlfriend.
Ooh.
I just went home. Years later, I wrote to her to apologize and discovered that the young woman, her cousin, had become pregnant with my buddy, who was, and so on and so forth. And I can say it now because he's passed. She had a baby, and she moved to Austria. And I guess she tracked him through the army, and the army made him pay her.
Ooh.
And I don't think his wife ever found out about it. I don't know how he could avoid it, but I don't think she did. I know his wife. But anyway, that's my time in Germany. I rotated back from Germany with a bunch of guys that were getting out at the same time. And we landed in New York. And, oh, New York. And we went to see the Rockettes.
Oh, of course.
And we did this, we did that. And then we agreed that we would go all together and drop each guy off as we moved west.
By train or car? Or?
We were hitchhiking. No, excuse me. We took a bus from New York to Elmira, New York, all together. And we dropped off a guy there. And there were several guys left there and went off on their own because they were all from the East Coast. And then myself and one other guy, we were from California. So as I recall, I think we took a bus.
That was a long...
Oh, bus, yeah. You drive, and you stop at a bus station. Let people on, people get off, and you drive, and so on and so forth. And it seems endless. I actually do remember coming through Glendale, Arizona.
Really?
Arizona. It had to be 5 o'clock in the morning. And the sun was just coming up. It was gorgeous. I mean, Phoenix was, and Glendale was, there were not a lot of buildings.
Yes, right.
A lot of
61.
Desert. A lot
61.
of desert.
Yeah.
61.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, we ended up heading for California. This guy lived in Baldwin Park, California. And so I went with him, and I had no place to go because my mom was gone, everybody else is gone. So I stayed in Baldwin Park for a period of time. And he introduced me to a young woman. I was 21. I was 21, and she was probably 19. She was a small guy. She was only 4'10". Small.
Small?
She was small. She'd been the homecoming queen for Baldwin Park High School.
Oh, wow.
And of course, that really interested me. Homecoming queen. Here I am, homecoming queen. Well, she and I dated a long time. Months. I asked her to marry me. And all the while I'd been living in the Baldwin Park area, and her mother and father, they loved me and so on. They fed me constantly and so on. Well, shortly after she told me she was pregnant, but not by me.
Ooh.
I have this thing about me that I have a need to reach out and help. It's not bragging about that, but I did a foolish thing. I married her.
Mm.
We were young and ignorant and so on, and the marriage was destined for failure. It was annulled eventually. Even though we had consummated it, it was annulled. She found a judge to agree, and so on and so forth. So that was my first marriage. So I went from that point, we had bouncing around doing stuff and so on. I even went back to skydiving.
Really?
Oh yeah, in California, I did skydiving in Oceanside, California, and half a dozen other places and so on and so forth. Not that many jumps.
Did you bump into any old buddies that?
No, no,
no,
not at all.
No.
Skydiving is different than military jumps, maybe. In order to acquire jump status, it's sort of a certificate, if not a license, for skydiving and so on, so that your pilot can take you up and agree that you've gone through training.
And you know what to do. And
well, I went through the school and everything at, I forget, in California. And I guess it was about the fourth jump. You had to do 5 jumps again, just like the military. And they're called DRCP jumps, dummy ripcord pull. So while you're on a static line that will deploy your chute, you've got this red flag, if you will, that you've reached in and pulled out, and they can see that this red flag is in your hand, so you've got the sense to deploy your chute all by yourself if you're free falling. So you're not free falling, you're on a static line. So the last one, I got out of the airplane. It was a fixed wing, a wing above, what have you. I don't remember what kind of aircraft it was. And of course the pilot sets the brakes so you can step on the wheel. You step out, you step on the wheel. There's no step, it's a wheel. Here's the wheel down here, and you step on that. You grab the strut, you get outside the door. And, sorry. Well, apparently he took his foot off the brake to the wheel. And the wheel spun, and I went straight down into the wheel. And it left an imprint on my helmet and knocked my plexiglass goggles up here someplace and so on. But I had that DRCP in my hand, so they cleared me for free fall. So after that, I did a number of free falls. Not a lot, a number. I had my own parachute.
Who packs those things for you?
I did.
They teach you how to pack.
Yes, sir. I learned how to pack them. I used to do it in my driveway. Actually, you can stuff them in with your boot, it'll open. But it's as long as they haven't been stored a long time, they get a little moldy and so on,
Yeah.
or moisture and so on. But the backpack has you take your chute and you fold it back and forth, what have you, and the shrouds you grab like this, and there's rubber bands, and you stuff in. Here's one side, and then you take this rubber band over here and rubber band over here, and so those are the shroud lines. And on top of that is a drogue chute, a small chute that captures the air and takes the chute out of the backpack. So I learned to pack. I had my own backpack. It was parachute. It was fancy. It was all black.
Ooh.
That was cool.
So you took it upon yourself to pack your chute. So if something was wrong, it's your fault.
My fault.
Right. But I would assume a lot of people didn't own their own parachute, right?
Most of the people, yes. The answer, if they were going through a school, they supplied the chutes.
Oh, I see.
They packed them, and so on. But once you acquired your own, there was nobody to pack them but yourself.
Right.
And so on. So, and it includes helmet and proper equipment, and you have an altimeter mounted on top of your reserve, and that sort of
What
thing.
altitude would you normally exit on a chute like that? Or
For
is there?
skydiving?
Yeah.
The military is 1,200 feet. Combat jump is 300 to 500.
Ooh. Well, at 300 feet, you're
on the ground.
You're on the ground by the.
Yeah, that's the whole point. That's the whole point. You don't have enough time to take flak and people shooting at you, and so you're on the ground. So anyway, with skydiving, it depends. 5, 10, 12,000 feet.
No. What, 12,000 feet? That must be quite an interesting jump. I mean, kind of floating.
you get time. You get time,
Yeah.
and so on. One particular time we met this young girl. We didn't know how old she was. We assumed she was 18 years old, and we took her skydiving. Well, it ended up she was not 18 years old. She signed it off on him, but she broke her arm on the exit of the aircraft. She went like that. She hit the side of the aircraft and broke her arm. And so the people down below are giving her directions, and that time it was a modified T-10 parachute. The back panel was cut out, and you had these toggles that you could steer the chute with. Well, she couldn't do that because she'd broken her arm.
Right.
And so they were talking her from the ground with a bullhorn to pull down and so on. She landed a mile away from the DZ. So
Could you on the civilian jumps, could you get to the target pretty easily?
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't.
no, it wasn't difficult.
I assume that assuming that there's not a lot of wind and crazy stuff.
Well,
that's going,
they're not going to.
they're not going to let you jump when it's.
No.
Yeah.
No. And a lot of the jumps occurred down in Oceanside, California, and a guy named Render was the guy who was in charge of the aircraft, and he leased aircraft and so on and so forth. He got arrested for stealing military parachutes. I don't know anything about that, and I was involved with that. But the rest of the time we'd go some place out in the desert, and somebody had an airplane and that sort of thing. So jump out of it for fun. For my son's 18th birthday, I took him skydiving. There's a picture right behind that little truck.
Oh yeah.
See me and my son. But this was not skydiving. This was tandem jumping, and we would go up, and you would be attached to another employee of the company, and you exit the aircraft,
That's what President Bush did.
Yes, exactly.
When he was
Exact
80
same.
or 90 or something.
Exact same thing.
Yeah.
So that was his birthday present. I haven't jumped since.
Yeah.
Because I had now obligations. I had a family. And if I broke my leg or I got injured, what have you, I had to reconsider my adventuresome spirit. So I went on to do other dangerous things. So what else you want to know? I'm out of the Army now.
Okay, well, you're out of the Army now. You said you have a son, but you're not telling me how that process went through.
Well,
what workforce or what work activity you were doing at the time?
when I got out of the Army, I contacted somebody in church, and he and his wife, Toby Burris, his name was. He and his wife were the choir leaders for the church I had attended as a teenager. Marvelous guy. He worked for Eli Lilly and Company, which is one of the companies that manufacture the vaccine, by the way.
Ah.
Eli Lilly. He was a salesman, and so he directed me to a company that he often visited called McCarthy and Robbins Wholesale Drugs. Now it's called McCarthy and Robbins Wholesale Liquor and Drugs. And they merged with some other company. But I was initially a truck driver, and I delivered things that you'll find in drugstores to drugstores all over the Los Angeles area. For a brief period of time, I worked inside filling orders of pharmacists and that sort of thing, and so that other truck drivers could deliver them. But that's what I did for a while, until a friend of mine said he was going to go down and apply for the Los Angeles Police Department. I said, well, that sounds like fun. So we went down.
So you're what, 22 through-ish now?
24.
24.
I don't remember what I did before that, but a lot. Anyway, we both went down to the City Hall, I believe, in Los Angeles, and filled out the paperwork, and started going through the process, which required a written test, oral interview, physical, and that sort of thing. Well, he failed, and I got the job. So I became a Los Angeles police officer. Went through the academy in late 1964. Became a police officer. There's right there. Here's my diploma. In August of 1965. No, it wasn't. It was, I think it was April of 1965.
Los Angeles Police Department.
Well, 1965.
Yes.
Now, what date does that sound familiar?
Isn't there something called Watts or something going on?
August 1960, August 13th, 1965, the Watts riots. So I went right from the academy into a brief patrol experience with a trainer and so on, into the Watts riots. Well, I wasn't in combat in the military, but I was certainly seeing some action there.
I'll bet.
It was, I think 32 or 36 people died during that period of time. It lasted 21 days or something like that. Not sure.
Wow.
But anyway, I was assigned to Central Division, downtown Los Angeles. Worked patrol, and I was there for 3 years. I was, again, married to someone else at the time, and that I had met. We can go back and revisit that, but we were living in La Mirada, California. I used my GI loan. We bought a house, little house, and that sort of thing. So I'd go to working morning watch, because if you're a rookie, you're going to work morning watch. So I'd work all night long, make a rest, and so on and so forth, and go to court all day long. So I got little sleep. She was pregnant, and she wasn't happy about it. The baby was born, and so on and so on. She's still not happy about it. So I did this for 3 years. And my neighbor across the street, because I guess he heard me sniveling, complaining about the wife and I, and because I kind of liked the job of police department. I kind of liked it. I liked the action. I liked the not knowing what was going around the corner. I liked that. And well, he said they were having well, first of all, he said that introduced me to someone that was selling real estate. And it happened to be my sergeant in Central Division in Los Angeles, Sergeant Biddle. And
No, was he was in the...
He was active. Because I have to kind of back up here because I'm losing track of time and space here. When I was with the police department, my sergeant was a real estate salesman part-time, off-duty.
Off-duty, okay.
I'd linked up with another former police sergeant by the name of Frank Anderson. And they talked me into going getting my real estate license. And I did. And so I wasn't very good at it. It was hard for me because I had a very youthful appearance, to convince people to let me sell their home.
Right.
So anyway, I was working downtown. I'd going to court, trying to sell real estate and so on and so forth, all the while with my wife, rightfully so, alone and not happy. So my neighbor across the street told me about there was a application for the Whittier Fire Department that they were hiring for the city of Whittier, Nixon's old hometown.
Right there.
So I went down and applied, passed the test, first time. I spent from 1968, I left the police department, turned in my Sam Brown, my gun, my badge, everything else I had, and became a Whittier fireman. I spent from 68 to 75 there.
In Whittier.
In Whittier. And that's where I first went to paramedic training, 1974-5.
Why did you choose to do that?
It intrigued me. Absolutely intrigued. I was assigned to, oh yeah, it's another thing, I got in trouble again. I kind of that was a period of time when people let their hair grow long.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to be like everybody else. Well, I was on the fire department. They had standards, right? So I let my hair grow, and it was down around my ears and so on. And so I got in trouble with it, and matter of fact, at one time I got time off on the job for not cutting my hair. So my captain and battalion chief came to me and said, okay, this has gone all the way up to City Hall. And so they said, okay, what kind of hairstyle could you live with? So, being an artist, I drew a profile of the standard sideburns, maybe middle of the tragus,
right
here, and so forth, and a mustache that didn't go beyond the smile line, and so on. It wasn't too long before I violated that one too.
They let you do that though?
But they ignored it that
Oh,
time. They kind of let me go and so on. So, so I was, as a punishment, I was assigned to the ambulance. Well, the ambulance gets them down all night long. Everybody is sleeping. But I liked it. I liked evaluating people, and I liked helping them, and in their dire need and that sort of thing. For you never knew.
Did they send you to training before they let you be?
No, it was just first aid. First aid. That was it. Band-aids, that sort of thing. First aid. But I was real curious, so I said, well, I want to learn more. So I went to the local hospital, and I took courses.
Mm.
I went to one of the first EMT classes in California.
Wow.
And I learned all sorts of stuff. I went to a hospital to learn how to interpret EKGs. That was my curiosity level. And meanwhile, all this stuff about Emergency, the television program Emergency, was going on, and Johnny and Roy. Well, I want to be just like Johnny and Roy. And so eventually I got to meet them, but just like Johnny and Roy. So I pushed and pushed and pushed for the Whittier Fire Department for them to have a paramedic program to train firefighter paramedics within their department. Well, everyone was initially against it.
Why would that be, do you think?
Well, because I'm a fireman. I fight fires.
Oh, I see.
Go out,
Okay.
You know, sick people and all that sort of thing. Because that's just how you get punished. And so eventually, what have you, I convinced people, and again I got into trouble. My wife at the time, she and I went out door to door, knocking on doors to get a document signed to present to the fire department, asking them to implement a paramedic program. And I went out and I spoke at the Elks Club and this without permission of the fire chief. Well, I didn't get any time off of that, but I got in trouble. And eventually the fire department, they accepted the fact that this was the direction of the fire service. The whole nation was going that direction. Mm-hmm. So they sent myself, and I had gone through a lot of personal training. I met a variety of people and so forth who were involved in the paramedic program for Los Angeles County Fire Department. And so I was selected to go to paramedic training. There's 7 of us. And I went away for 3 months.
Where was that?
We went from Whittier to paramedic training at Harbor UCLA Hospital, where we went through, you know, all the classes on anatomy and chemistry and everything else, cardiology, how to interpret EKGs, manage wounds, trauma wounds, gunshot wounds. I mean, you name it, just name it. And we went through that. How to start IVs, how to draw bloods, how to give a cardiac injection directly into the heart, how to, deliver babies, that sort of thing. So for my internship, because we go through the training at the hospital, then internship, I was assigned to LA County Fire on one of their training units with a preceptor, somebody to train us. And we spent several months there going through, and either it's a pass-fail. It's all simply pass-fail. And so I passed quickly. Maybe this is not appropriate, but I'm going to tell you anyway. The way I passed was, it was a young woman, who was complaining of chest pain. She was a very buxom woman, young lady, and so on. The fact is, she was probably hyperventilating. But nevertheless, you have to make sure that you put the patches on to take an EKG. So I one-handed the bra, And they said, "You pass." It was just like that, you know. I mean, that wasn't really what happened, but that's what they said.
Yeah.
So on. But later on, yes, I satisfactorily passed all the tests and completed all the training and so on, and was reassigned back to Whittier Fire Department, where myself and another fellow were assigned together on the paramedic squad. I mean, right off the bat, we got, well,
God, that area.
well, you know, Whittier is a middle class area, plus a very highfalutin, high dollar area.
Right.
And one of the first calls was at a new car showroom, and it was a guy that had chest pain and went unconscious, had a heart attack. So we got there with our defibrillator and our drug box and so on. We're brand new and all excited and so on. And we went through all of the evaluation and so on and so forth. And my partner was filling out the form. I was dealing with the patient. I was the patient man. He was a radio man. And I took the defibrillator out and put the paddles on it and have it. And he was flatline. Well, no, he had an aortic pulse, but it was not giving any blood to his brain. So I zapped him. And he woke up. "Well, don't do that!" That's what he said. Now, whether or not he was actually unconscious or not, I don't. Because we checked his pulse, we did everything heavy, but he woke up right now. So that was my first save.
Wow.
And after that, there were thousands. I mean, I can go on and on and on.
It seemed like, I don't know, a friend of mine, my father was a physician in Phoenix, and my best friend was going to school, and he thought during the summer that he might become a doctor. He was going to school at Princeton. So my dad arranged for him to work at night at the hospital, kind of at the emergency room. And he said they brought a guy in that was beaten with a ball peen hammer, and he died in his arms.
Yeah.
And he determined, I don't think I want to be a doctor. So then he became a lawyer. Did you, when you see things like that, does that affect you after the fact much or not? Or how does one cope with that, I guess is the best way to phrase it.
Well, you sort of hide it. Today, there are more firefighters die of suicide than they do on the fire ground. It's not nationally known, is it?
Mm.
More firefighters die of self-inflicted wounds, like cops. Like cops and firefighters, what have you. We see people in their worst situation possible. And trauma that is unbelievable. It's the smell of blood. Blood has this odor, coupled with gunpowder, and gaping wounds, bleeding out, families screaming and crying. I mean, it's kind of like a cup. It's an emotional cup that you sort of push behind you. You can't take it home and tell your wife about it.
Sure.
So you sort of joke about it. Gallows humor. You joke about it. Make fun of something. Or you talk to your partner and so on. It depends. But right now I'm involved in helping to put together a day-long conference in Prescott, targeting firefighters, cops, paramedics, and veterans, both active and retired, going all the way back to Vietnam. And the purpose of it is to help them deal with PTSD. PTSD, it's a PTS, it's an injury. It's an injury to you're injured.
Right, the I part.
Because the I is more acceptable to insurance companies and workman's compensation. again, there's one fellow that I know that is helping me put this conference together, and it'll February of next year in Prescott. And we already have speakers lined up and everything else. But this one fellow, a law enforcement officer, he spent years in law enforcement. The things he saw unbelievable. He's lost partners, people he supervised as a sergeant. One man who came to his home when having committed suicide in his bedroom, and he lost a wife, and on and on and on. He went all the way to the bottom. Started drinking and so heavily. Got in 2 different accidents. One caused an injury to a family, and he came from the bottom all the way back up again. He wrote a book sitting up on my shelf up there, and the book is made into a movie now.
Oh, really?
And as we speak.
Hmm.
Keith Notek, his name is. And so he's part of this group that recognizes the need to help all those folks, what have you, deal with it. As far as how did I do it, I had moments crying for no reason.
Mm.
Out of the blue.
Just
Started
a
crying.
release. A
Just
release.
started crying. Well, the wife looks over and thinks you're nuts. I'm just stuff I'd rather forget. We had 2 young ladies who were gorgeous. They were driving in their Volkswagen. Came up over a hill over the freeway, and the downside of the hill ran into the back of the parked trailer right underneath, took their face right off, both of them. Another young man in the hospital in Cerritos, what have you, early before they had emergency room doctors, he had attempted to commit suicide. He was despondent. He'd stolen an airplane. Didn't know how to fly. He stole the airplane, landed it, crashed it, got arrested and so on. And he, in his despondency, tried to commit suicide with a rifle. And he shot himself here, nicked the heart, and there's a sac around the heart, and was bleeding, so the heart couldn't beat, couldn't expand. And the doctor didn't know what to do. We were in the emergency room with this kid, and my partner says, "Well, do something, doctor." Yeah. So we watched him die. I mean, that's just a few. But, I mean, I worked a hot house, meaning we got there 8 o'clock in the morning and sometimes didn't get home late. But I loved it. It was an adrenaline junkie, adrenaline rush. I loved every minute of it. And it was the camaraderie, what have you, that I loved. It was my
and the teamwork and
my partner, every seamless. The fire service is like used to be. It was like a fraternity. It was like the military with guys that you depended on and so on. You know, my partner, when I was working on a patient, I knew I could reach back like this. I knew exactly what he was going to hand. He had the right drug at the right time and so on and so forth. Bang.
Wow.
That's kind of...
So you're kind of a mobile surgical unit almost type thing.
Not quite.
Well, I mean, you're not taking out cancer and stuff, but I mean, you're dealing with a lot of things.
To assess, report, and treat. That was it. Transport. Today, the paramedics do much more than we did. I mean, I wouldn't hold a candle to the paramedics today. But anyway, so that's what I did for 29 years.
Wow.
In LA County Fire.
29 years. That's a pretty full career in one particular situation.
Well, I initially as a firefighter paramedic, dual role, and then later on as a captain on an engine company, truck company, and briefly as a paramedic on board helicopters and so on, mountain rescue, that sort of thing. But every day was a new day. It was a wonderful, wonderful...
Every day was a new day where you were needed.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that goes all the way back to your
Yeah.
needed.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so today I kind of miss it, but I have my hands still in it. I'm an elected member of the Sedona Fire Board. I have a year and a half left of a 4-year term, and so I'm still involved in that, but not operationally. I'm involved in one, hiring and firing fire chiefs. We just hired one marvelous guy out of Pasadena, California, and John Troutwine, and then dealing with budget and policy. So there's 5 of us,
Wow.
and 2 of us have fire experience. One guy, Dave Soto, he's former LA City fire captain. Myself as a fire captain with LA County, and then there's 3 civilians that had little experience, but they're knowledgeable in business and that sort of thing.
Cool.
So,
Well, let's don't forget what brought us together.
right.
Your involvement with the Sons of the American Revolution,
Oh, absolutely.
and
Yeah.
give us a little background of
Well,
where one finds out that he is a son of the American
I
Revolution.
know. I told you earlier that I'm approaching 30 years of doing genealogical research.
Yes, yes.
I really didn't know as a young person because my mother died and my father didn't know, and I didn't have any. I was only casually aware of cousins in the East Coast, largely, and an uncle that was that Marine that would visit occasionally and so on. So I started doing research, and whatever I do, I'm what's called a completionist. I don't leave any stones unturned.
Why start it if you can't complete it right?
You know, it became everyday thing. And I was on the internet when I learned to use it and so on and so forth, to do research. I found out who my relatives were on my mother's side, my father's side. I ran into a brick wall on my father's side because I couldn't find out who my great-great-grandfather was. I eventually did. I tracked them all the way back to Ireland, and,
Wow.
and a little town in Ireland. On my mother's side, obviously I started looking into people, and I've birth certificates, death certificates, photographs, and so on and so forth. And one thing led to the next with Ancestry.com. And I started to find out that people fought in the Civil War and in the Revolutionary War and that sort of thing. So I was introduced to SAR, out of the chapter in Prescott. And
Is there not a chapter here in
no.
No.
There is a chapter here for DAR,
No, daughters, okay.
but not here for SAR. And Jim Cates, remember Jim?
Mm-hmm.
Jim Cates helped me through the process. And of course Wayne handled it and
Right.
so forth. And there's my, someplace here, on the wall. Used to have it, it's up there someplace. I've got so many certificates I've run out of wall space. Anyway, his name is Anderson. As you get old, you just forget stuff.
Well, you know, it's there.
Edwards.
Is it
His name was John Edwards.
John Edwards?
John
Okay.
Edwards was a private, and he fought with Washington.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He was with the Virginia 15th Regiment, and he fought in Brandywine and all his big battles and so on and so forth. And he survived. Obviously, I'm here.
Yeah.
There may have been others. There is one other, and I have a supplemental in for this particular person. His name was Richard Calloway. He was a colonel. Richard Calloway and Daniel Boone were best buds.
Huh.
And they essentially broke ground for what we know as Kentucky.
Hmm.
They were like surveyors. and they were hired by a company to go in and blaze the trails and so on, Boonesville and all that stuff. And so I have a supplemental in for him, and there may be others, I'm not sure. The process is slow. But with regard to SAR, I got, I'm not one to keep the chair warm. I got involved, and I was asked to participate at the board level, and I have. The problem is that, and you're probably well aware of this, we're a distance from Prescott,
Right.
and the meetings and so on. So I'm the vice president at the moment. I was asked to be considered for the presidency this coming year. I can't do it.
No?
It's just the distance is too great.
Yeah.
The president has equipment and so on that he brings to each meeting and so on. And what if I can't make it? Who's going to come and pick it up? And so on. So I've decided not to continue on as president. I will remain if no one else steps forward as the vice president. Because if anything, what I'm good at is supporting people. I think I've supported Jack in everything he's accomplished. And been an advisor, a sounding board, and that sort of thing. And everybody in his position needs someone like that.
Oh, of course.
So on. And, but it wouldn't be fair to the chapter for someone who is involved as I am, first with the fire board. I'm involved with the church security, training people to be.
Unfortunately, there's only 24 hours a day.
There's
24 hours in a day.
That's what my
and then
I'm an artist. There's one.
I know you
are.
are. Yes.
I'm sitting. I'm an artist, and I paint, and I do this, and I do that, and so on. And
is this all your art self-taught, or is it? Did you go?
Basically.
Did you go to take any classes from?
Yes and no. I started off. I could always draw. In the Army, that's how they picked me for that drafting job. But I doodled for years and so on. You can do a doodle, and I can make something out of it. I can imagine it, and it's eye-hand coordination is what it is, imagination. And so I went to the library, and I decided, well, what am I going to do? Because the previous wife, not this one, previous wife, I married 4 times, suggested I pick up some art. So we were on a cruise ship at the time. So I took a little class on a cruise ship. We got back home, so my interest peaked because it seemed like I kind of enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It was a downtime. It was something where I could concentrate on something. Nothing around me mattered. And so I went to the library and I checked out books and DVDs and so on and decided whether I wanted to do oils or pastels or watercolors or sculpting and so on and so forth. There's a sculpture that I did.
Oh, wow.
And so I selected watercolor. Why? Because it's the most difficult.
And it has watercolors creates kind of a mystical thing to it. It really, I mean, it can be very exact, but then if blending a little water in here, I mean, I am attracted to watercolors. I've never done anything with tried to do anything with it, but I've found that when I see watercolors that I am excited about, usually it's some kind of leaves me kind of guessing.
Yeah. I kid, and I am kidding. One day you will walk into a second-hand store, and over in the corner you'll see a stack of frames, and amongst the frames will be this watercolor with this unknown painter called Eugene McCarthy.
Well, maybe it's time to say we're going to wrap this up because
Sounds
it's been quite an interesting interview from my point of view, and of course you said it wasn't going to last very long. It's only been an hour and 40 minutes.
Well, I'm sorry.
So anyway, I noticed that you have a shirt on.
Absolutely.
Yes, the Veterans History
History
Project. So this interview that we've done will be sent back to the Library of Congress, and it only took me 5 years for it to actually, you could see the interview. So don't rush down tomorrow once it's sent off, thinking that it's going to be there, but it will be, and I really thank you for allowing me to sit down and do this interview, because we have a relationship, and it's always a pleasure to be able to put something like this together that will last as like I say, as long as our country has a breath.
Well, I'll tell you what, I may be looking from Camp Navajo. That's where I'll be interred.
Oh, good.
And so...
Have you been there yet?
No, but I'm going this next month to help inter 18 found veterans.
And I'll be there too.
Yeah.
So we'll be able to link up there, and that'll be another thing on your resume. I think that you'll really think that's it's quite a unique experience. But we wrapped up this interview, and again, here's Dick Mellick interviewing Gene McCarthy, and time for something else to do, I'm sure. Take care, Gene.
Thank you, Dick. I appreciate it.
Yeah.